Well, this morning we're going to shift gears a little bit. I know last week we talked about the Good Samaritan, and we drew some lessons from that and learned together. It was very uplifting to me. I hope you all got something worthwhile out of it as well. So, instead of being in Luke this morning, we're going to be in Matthew, and if you guys want to be going in that direction, you can turn over to Matthew chapter 13. We'll get there in just a moment, but the parable that we're going to look at today is recorded in Matthew, Mark, and in Luke. There's a little bit of varying information in each account, but it certainly reminds us the power of a good story. And I know you all in this class have talked about stories a good bit over the past several months with Bill and others. But what makes a good story?
Characters.
Characters are always an interesting part of the story. What else?
If it has someone you can relate to in it.
Relatable. I like that, Brother Kent. That's good. What else? I see some wheels turning. The way it's told.
The storyteller.
A good storyteller makes the story.
A good topic, too.
Absolutely. So, we have the makings in the creation, the oration of a great story, starting right here in Matthew chapter 13, verses 1 and following. And it's the parable of the sower. It's got all these things that you all just mentioned. It's got certainly one character. It's got some interesting objects in the different forms of soil. It's got a really good topic. And is there a better storyteller than the person that tells this story? I think we would all agree that there is not. So, this series of parables recorded here in Matthew chapter 13 are known as the kingdom parables. Anybody know why that is?
It's comparing things to the kingdom.
Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is like ... Then he starts his story. So, think about this in the form of a story. And these are just the things that I came up with. Your list was far better than mine, but I just jotting things down and talking with Brandy, and I came up with a story needs to have a hook. It's like a good bait, an attention getter. Think about a person that has a wonderful storytelling talent or good speaking attributes. They know how to introduce. They know how to get their audience attention. They know how to command the room. We're two, as Uncle Mike said, interesting characters or objects that produce a clear and concise plot. We have that here as well. We'll see in just a moment. And as B conveyed, we want to have a lesson or a moral, and it helps a lot too if it engages us, if it entertains us. So, really quickly, I'm going to read Mark chapter 4 and verse 13. And I think it will help us establish the purpose of this parable, we'll say. Maybe. So, Mark 4 and verse 13, and it reads, and this is Jesus speaking. It says, and he said to them, do you not understand this parable? How then will you understand all the parables? So, in layman's terms, the parable of the sower unlocks the rest of them. We have to understand what to understand the parables and to understand the truth that Jesus is trying to convey. You have to understand the nature of the kingdom, right? Okay. So, let's talk about this seed before we get into the reading. What does the seed represent in the parable of the sower? We've all read this story numerous times. We've heard classes. We've even had it in vacation Bible school when I was a kid.
The Word of God.
Yes, ma'am. So what does a seed represent? When you think of any seed, anything that has the potential for growth and fruitfulness. What does it do?
It was
It's the
life.
beginning.
It's the beginning of a new what?
Life.
New life. Okay? So we've got the potential for new life. And I kind of gave it away a minute ago, but I said fruitfulness. What does fruitfulness in regards to the Christian life bring to your mind individually? Instantly, my mind went to something. You read my notes. So, we won't sing the song. I don't think we have to, but I think it's great that our little ones are learning the fruits of the Spirit and learning all of this stuff in Outdoor Bible that equips them. And we have such talent upstairs that make it fun. But what happens, or what has to happen, what must happen for us to bear fruit? What has to occur?
It has to be watered. That's one thing.
So that it has to be watered, yes ma'am. But ultimately, there has to be some production. The seed has to pop out of the ground. It has to mature. But gardeners and horticulturists and agricultural experts in here, do all seeds grow at the same rate? Okay. I'm going to take a little aside just in my yard. I have a staunch enemy in bamboo. Does anyone in here know anything about bamboo?
Grows the fastest growing plant in the world, isn't it?
An interesting stat, Bubba, and I know you're a stat person. Bamboo has the potential for 36 inches, 1 yard in our measurement system, of growth in a 24-hour period. I guarantee you the bamboo at my house meets that or exceeds it. I mean, as fast as I can get rid of it, it's back.
Which one grows faster, bamboo or kudzu?
I don't want to know, sister.
I thought she was going to say the hat.
But let's compare and contrast that with something that's very familiar to all of us here in the South, and it's a pine tree. A longleaf pine tree, which is the most valuable according to my forester brother-in-law / youth minister. A longleaf pine tree stays in its grass stage for, he said, roughly 3 to 6 years. So it does nothing other than be kind of a little plant shaped about like this for 3 to 6 years. After that, though, it shoots up. So you've got this bamboo that grows super, super fast that essentially has no value, maybe to a panda bear. But you've got this longleaf pine tree that can grow, and right now it's worth gold. So we really need to be mindful and patient with each other when it comes to our rates of growth. I think sometimes we get caught up in, well, I'm a little ahead of that person. They need to catch up. They need to do more. They need to be here more. So what about the sower? We know the sower in Jesus' parable is him. But who else can the sower be?
Satan, yeah. If you want to be on the opposite end of the...
I hope not, but that's certainly true in today's world. Yes, ma'am.
Anyone who has something to sow. If they know the Lord, if they know the Word, then they can sow it.
Anyone in this room can be a sower. That's absolutely right, Miss Margaret. And I think it's important that we don't get caught up in preaching and teaching. I know those are intimidating words to some people. We can sow seeds by just the way we live, by the way we act, by the way we carry ourselves, by the way we speak.
Jeff, that might not be good seeds either.
That's exactly right. I think we've got to be super, super careful.
Now, I've seen that if you think about the ground, you can't just throw seed anyway. Like a lot of us that are sowing, before the sowing even takes place, you have to prepare the ground. And that's certainly something we can all do, is work on our own hearts, but also help soften the hearts of others to hear the gospel.
So, with that being said, what does the sower of anything have to have? Whether it's a sower of a corn seed, a wheat seed, or God's Word. What do they have to have in that seed?
Knowledge.
You got to have knowledge. You got to have water. Yes, sir.
The belief that it will produce.
Faith. Absolutely. So, I'm not much of a farmer other than for wildlife a little bit. What I know about that, I gleaned from my uncle and other people who taught me how to be a good wildlife manager / outdoorsman. But when I plant that food plot seed, I have a hope that it's going to grow up and be a pretty green wheat field. I have faith that it will. How can we be active in that, though? I mean, after that, do we really have control? I see you shaking your head, Brother Conrad. What can we do at that point once the seed's in the ground?
You know, you got to tend to it, to work it. These are the things that, you know, that you normally do.
Please come up. Please come up. Please come up.
Yeah. That and the amount of nutrients you put in the ground and when you put them there and so on and so forth has a lot to do with, you know, but that's on the farming side of it, but on what we're talking, I mean, it's the same parable. We have to pay attention to what people and what we think, and the ones that are we're trying to get to grow and pray that they'll grow. We have to work at it.
The Bible tells us we've got to be ready in season and out of season, right? So in season and out of season, to me.
And what you said a while ago, somebody did about the life that you live and what people see and what you say and so on and so forth. You may be not knowing but planning all the time if you do what you're supposed to do.
We mentioned last week when we were talking about the story of the Good Samaritan, we talked about how, people aren't going to want to hear good news from a miserable human being. So we need to make sure we live joyful lives. Joy and happiness aren't always congruent and aligned. That's something we've got to be able to reconcile, I guess would be the right word. So we've talked about our soil prep, our seed dispersing. It's not easy. It's work. Yes, sir, Brother Grady.
To be a good farmer, you don't just go down to the local feed store, buy a pack of seeds, and start throwing them out. And these parables to the ungodly don't mean nothing.
That's exactly right. Well, that was Jesus' purpose in telling them.
We have to study these parables, and we as godly people are going to be better equipped to sow the word, and not just somebody going down to the local feed store and grabbing a handful of seeds and throwing them out and expecting good results.
That's exactly right. We learn from what Jesus says later on after he tells the parable that those who are meant to understand, understand. Those who are not meant to understand it just hear this nice little anecdote that he came up with, and they kind of move on along their merry way. But let's get into the parable itself.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Let me say one other thing. In talking about, life itself, the way we live and whatever, I feel like that most anybody here could think back in their life, there was somebody that had an impression or had said something or did something that caused me to be here today or you to be here today or whatever. You had a mentor of such.
Brother, you need the microphone, not me. That's an excellent point.
It brought you here,
That's exactly right.
And we need to do the same thing.
No, that's exactly right. And I count you as one of those people that I've looked up to over the years. I mean, a lot of people in this room. But if someone would like to read verses 1 through 4 in Matthew 13, just so someone else can talk besides me.
I'll read it.
13, 1 through 4, Johnny.
Okay. On the same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the sea. And great multitudes were gathered together to him, so that he got into a boat and sat, and the whole multitude stood on the shore. Then he spoke many things to them in parables, saying, Behold, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seed fell by the wayside, and the birds came and devoured them.
Thank you, Johnny. So we can all glean from this that Jesus had drawn such a following, or so many fans, depending on how you want to look at it, that he had to retreat to a boat. He was overwhelmed, and so he's kind of got this podium, this stage, sitting in the boat on this body of water, and he begins to speak. So, with this seed on the wayside, on the path, some versions say, the birds come and snatch it away. Who do the birds represent? The evil one. So, first century Jews, or that time period in Jewish culture, Jews didn't have a very high opinion of birds. Like, in a little bit of research that I did, owls signified evil to them. Much of the, I guess what we would call the raptors, the hawks and the eagles and ospreys and stuff like that, they didn't have a high opinion of. Number one, they were unclean to them. So this would resonate with them as, oh man, he brought up birds. Just trying to think of how to convey this. Think about birds that steal things. Think about birds that mess things up. I think I said that tactfully enough. Talking about pigeons, Brother Murphy? Uncle Mike, we've got a big time issue with pigeons at Dauphin Island, don't we? Is there any way to deter those pigeons? Or seagulls, or any bird that makes a mess? A Canada goose? So, it's kind of funny, driving around my neighborhood, a lot of the people in our neighborhood have these little spikes on top of their house. I said, well, that's a novel idea. Keep birds from landing on your house, and, smart. Well, I just Googled bird spikes, or bird deterrent spikes. Well, this video came up, and it was like the Guinness World Record pigeon. And he lights on this house that has all these spikes on the roof cap. That pigeon lights, and he sits there for a minute, and he kind of looks both ways. Well, he starts walking, and he nips those spikes off the cap of the roof with his beak. He takes every one of them off. So, that's in my way. I've got to move it. So obviously that didn't work. But what would deter him? What would frighten him? What would get him off that roof?
Number sevens.
You got that right.
Something bigger.
Yes, ma'am. Sister Joanne.
I just want to share something with you. All of you know that Duke died from lung cancer. And so we went to Birmingham and we took the x-rays and things from down here. And now this is UAB. It's supposed to be some of the best. And he looked at Duke's x-rays and he said, have you been around pigeons? Just want to pass that along. I mean, everybody thinks, and at one time, we had a lot of geese around the lake behind our house.
Yes, ma'am.
And we didn't understand, but one of the guys on the other side was shooting the geese a lot, and he didn't want them around. Well, to come to find out, his dad lived on the other side, and he had lung problems, and it was from him where the geese had, and him riding over the lawnmower. I'm just throwing that out.
Gracious.
So, but pigeons are very dangerous.
I knew I didn't like them.
I mean, the pigeons, from my viewpoint, it's not coming from me. It's coming from the doctor.
Yes, ma'am. So, we talked about, Uncle Mike said number sevens. That's a good deterrent. Brandy said something bigger. A bigger bird. One of those raptors that I mentioned earlier. So, if Satan was able to swoop in and swipe this seed, these birds were able to swoop in and swipe this seed and take it away, how do we guard against that? How do we look out for that? How do we be ready for that?
Farmers use scarecrows.
Or the fake owls that are this big. If we're so full of the Word, in the beginning was the Word, that Word, if He's in there, no bird, no matter how big or how bad, is going to swoop in and get it. So let's move on to verse 5 and 6. But, we've got to think about our attitudes when we're reading this and when we're living our lives, as Mr. Conrad brought up. If our attitude is right, our heart's going to be right, and we're going to have that guard. So verse 5 and 6 says, Brandy.
Other seeds fell on shallow soil with underlying rock. The seeds sprouted quickly because the soil was shallow. But the plants soon wilted under the hot sun, and since they didn't have deep roots, they died.
So, this rocky soil, we don't deal too much in rocks around here. You get in central Alabama, North Alabama, and Tennessee, their soil is rockier. What do they have to do if they want to develop, if they want to farm, if they want to utilize their land?
Get rid of the rocks.
You got to remove. How do they generally remove it? They blast it. That's right. So, we've got this soil. Seed goes down. It pops up. But it has nowhere to go. Can't take root. What does that convey in when we have someone new accept Jesus and be baptized and start worshiping with us here? Have the potential to. How do we keep those rocks out? We've got to support them. We've just got to be mindful of our situation.
Yes, feed us.
Lifestyle.
You got to feed them. That's right.
They gotta get away from what's causing them to have all the rocks.
What happens when there's no depth in a relationship? Not just our relationship with Jesus, a relationship, husband, wife, friend, brother, sister, father, son, mother, daughter.
Or they're gonna seek other places to find the.
That's right. It can't thrive.
That's right.
That's right. It cannot thrive. So, John 16:33 tells us what? Before that.
In this world we will have tribulation.
Not when, if, maybe, we will. Shallow roots will not be able to endure tribulation. I think of a book that I read one time. It's called Not a Fan. We actually utilized it in the class across the way. And the whole purpose of the book was to denote what a fan of Jesus was versus what a follower of Jesus was. You know, a fan of any sports team or person, you know, they get the t-shirt, they get the hat. But what is a true follower?
One sticks with the leader.
Thick and thin, right? Thick and thin. A good example to me of a fan in Scripture, someone that was on the cusp of getting it and being able to comprehend and being fruitful, was the rich young man. We all recall that story. You know, in one account, we know that Jesus saw the man and He loved the man. The guy was a good guy. I mean, we would consider him a good moral person. He honored his father and his mother. He followed the old law commandments. But what could he not let go of?
Possession.
Because he had great
Possession.
even that, when we think about it, is that a bad thing? You know, we'll get to more of this a little bit later on in our discussion, but, you know, possessions and wherewithal, is that in and of itself inherently a bad thing? What does Jesus say is a bad thing in connection with that? That's exactly right. A lot of good can be done with possessions and wherewithal and blessings. The rich young man just couldn't turn loose of that. He couldn't comprehend that one last step. So we're going to move on to the weeds and the thorns in verse 7. And I'll read it. It says, "Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them." Do weeds, thorns, and other undesirable plants, do they need any encouragement to grow? I have weeds at my house, I think, that could grow up through this tile. You know, how do we, and we talked about this a few moments ago, how do we nurture the good while fighting off the bad? Take care of the good, eliminate the waste.
Living in the world and not letting the world live in us.
Exactly right, Ashley. These thorns, these weeds, you know, Jesus tells us later on when He's going through His exposition of the parable, he says, cares of the world. Lately, there's been a lot of talk about being anxious and worrying. And worrying is an easy thing to say that we don't do, but it's a really hard thing to put into practice, in my experience. But worrying just drains time. It drains your energy, makes you lose sleep. But in Paul's letter to the Philippians, what does he say in chapter 4, verses 6 and 7 about worrying?
Be anxious for nothing.
To me, that is might be two of the hardest verses in the Bible to comprehend and put into practice.
Just thinking about weeds, some of the weeds that I think are really hard to pull are the kids, when they're pulling them with us, they think are hard. If we just ask Daddy to go pull the weed, he seems to be able to get it out a lot easier than we do. And you can really apply that to your life. Sometimes there's weeds that are growing in your garden that you just can't pull out. But if we just ask God to pull them out or to take care of it, they're not any trouble for him.
Sometimes that's an excuse for me to get to pull all the weeds.
You gotta get it up by the roots.
But the thing about weeds too is it requires constant maintenance. If you stay on top of it, then it's really not that big of a chore, you know. But if you let it get out of hand, then it's this really could be big ordeal. So if you apply that to yourself or others, you know, if you're surrounding yourself by those people that are helping to prune and maintain that and help you be cognizant of that sin in your life or what have you, then it may not get to be such a big issue, you know.
That's absolutely right, Crystal. What's another thing that can be a thorn or a weed that can grow up and ultimately choke us out if we let it? Hate's one. But I'm thinking a drive to do something other than prioritize our relationship with Jesus or the work that He has for us to do. Whether that be, you know, a hobby, our jobs,
Screens.
my goodness, you got that right, brother. You know, and there's so much trash that flows into our life today against, you know, 20-ish years ago. Anytime we go on a car trip now, we have to have some kind of screen in front of our little ones. Otherwise, it turns into an "Are we there yet?" "Are we there yet's turned into pull off on the side of the road and get a beating when I was 6 or 7. But it's just amazing how far we went down the road of self-gratification and how the media in the world tries to pump us full of junk. So, when it comes to weeds, when it comes to thorns, when it comes to rocks, all this stuff that's got to go, sometimes we got to do some heavy-duty weed pulling. We've got to spray some Roundup. We've got to do some bush hogging. We've got to do some excavating. But that stuff's not easy. And it's not going to happen overnight. We just have to make our requests known, right? Pray for ourselves, pray for our families, pray for each other.
Jeff's a good point Crystal made. You got to stay on top of it. With edifying our brothers and sisters, it's a non-stop thing. We can't leave it alone and try to come back. It's really hard to restore somebody when they've been left alone.
Yes, sir. That's exactly right. Exactly right. So, kind of in line with what Uncle Mike's saying, and some little practical tools that we can put into our lives to help us exercise and be more cognizant of these things. Who remembers the chicken soup books? My mom had a basket full of them. I picked one up one time and it just kind of, blew me away what was in there. So, Brandy and I came up with a little bit of chicken soup for the sower, if you will. If you'll humor me for just a minute. So number one, we need to open up our ears. My good friend Bubba likes to utilize a term called situational awareness. Are we aware of our surroundings? Are we aware of that person that needs restoring that Uncle Mike brought up? Are we aware of that person that just needs a phone call or a hug or a card or a smile? Number two, we need to deal with our distractions. Pruning is inevitable. We need it. People around us need it. Number three, we need to share what we know with others. How does that help us? Not talking about a long sermon. I'm not even really talking about an in-depth Bible study. Just how do we share what we know? Our lights need to be shining, right? Whether we're aggravated that there's 2 cashiers at Walmart and it's 30 people deep and all the self-checkouts don't work, or somebody rear ends us and runs off at the mall. Attitude is everything. Number 4, we need to expect, anticipate, be ready for suffering. Number 5, we need to address cynicism. Cynicism is kind of a unique word. We don't need to hang on to stuff. We don't need to gunny sack. Number 6, we need to address the things that have a hold on us. Like Crystal said, we got to stay on top of it. If we know we have issues with something trying to creep into our life, like those thorns do, we've got to be ready to pull them out. Number 7, and I think this is really, really important, especially given the events of the past, 12, 15, 18 months, we need to make time to worship. I know we're doing that. I hope everyone is. I pray that everyone is. Back when we were all at home and we were trying our best to still have worship services, and the elders were doing all that they could to make it as close to normal as it could possibly be, and our ministry team was doing all that they could to make it as close to normal as they possibly could. How did we handle that? Were we disciplined? Did we make worship a matter of convenience? If we do, and if we did, we need to fix that, certainly. And we're not going to spread good seeds and be able to water and maintain and support good seeds and good crops if we're not worshiping. Number 8, y'all don't throw rocks at me. Don't rely on feelings. I know that's a big thing in today's world, emotional, and this person hurt me, this person bothers me, this person said something ugly to me, this person didn't smile at me. If Jesus and His disciples and the people that made it possible for us to have this if they would have allowed their feelings to be hurt and allowed little things to get them down, where would we be today?
I've always heard feelings are like a mattress. It's great when you're on top of it, but it's a mess when you're underneath it.
That is a fantastic analogy. And that is a fact. Number 9, we can't coast. We can't coast spiritually. I mean, we wouldn't coast in our daily life. We don't coast at our jobs. If we did, we're going to get fired. We can't coast in our marriage relationships, or they're not going to thrive. We can't coast as parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles. We're not going to be great at that. We have to be active and work to develop our own active, faithful relationship with God through Jesus. I'm certainly here because of the people that came before me, like Brother Conrad said. But I can't rely on my grandparents, my mom, my dad, my aunt, my uncle to keep me here. Just like Harper and Hadley and Melanie can't rely on Brandy and me to keep them here. It's constant. So finally, some good news in verse 8. Other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears, let him hear. Good ground, God's in our DNA. We all know what DNA is. We want Him to be entrenched within us. Can you remove a DNA strand? That's above my pay grade, but I think it'd be really hard. Who would take a return on investment in a crop yield of 100, 60, or 30 times? Not 100%, 60%, or 30%, 100 times. Jesus tells us that's possible if we do our part. If we make sure that we're that good soil, if we make sure that those around us are that good soil. But what has to work? What has to be in place for all that to come together? What's the recipe?
Takes a lot of things. First, the sower knows at the beginning that not all the seed's going to produce, and yet he sows anyway. Second, the seed, the only way it can produce is to fight through the heat, the drought, everything, and the harvest is not till the end. It's not an instantaneous, look at me, just day I was planting today, I got fruit. You know, it's a lifelong journey.
It's a commitment.
It's a commitment. But the farmer knows it very well. If the farmer understood that if I plant a seed, I'll get a seed back. That's not what he planted. But the farmer knows one kernel of corn can produce a whole bunch.
That's exactly right.
He plants a bunch of them, knowing that not all of them are going to grow. But he cares for every individual one because each of them has a potential to produce so much more than was planted.
And that's pretty much a synopsis of what we just read. That's right. Yes, sir.
Every person has potential. And we can't give up because they're not receptive right now. The way we help people is by encouraging people. And a seed that's struggling can really be turned around by a little bit of watering, which can be patience or kindness or encouragement.
Some nurturing. That's right.
Really nurturing.
Yes, sir.
It's really turning a person around.
Great points, Johnny. Yes, sir, Brother Grady.
This is not our business to worry that when we go out and put the word out, they're not rejecting us. And I've had to remind myself over the years about that. It's not personal against any of us. There's a God in heaven. You know, we just have to keep on. It's like if you have a crop and you have a severe drought, that crop's not going to be productive. You may get a little bit out of it. I watched a show over in Israel right now. This guy has over 5,000 olive trees. Some of them are close to 1,000 years old. Some of them are very new, but they're all adult trees. There's such a shortage of water, he's taking half his crop out because the need of water. Excuse me, that wasn't Israel. That's actually going on right now in California. Point being made, we can't get discouraged about this seed producing we have to throw out, and it should be always constant on our minds. And I know the elders are always worried and working towards that. And like Mike's talking about, we got folks, everybody knows somebody's not here today that was here before in the past. And I'm not talking about somebody's going to a different church. I'm talking about people who are not going to church.
Yes, sir.
They've got hurt by whatever in the world, the things that happen in their lives. And we need to be working on those seeds.
That's exactly right. We've all got to keep in mind that God's going to provide the increase. We just have to do our part and put the work in. Everyone, I appreciate you all. Thank you for being here. I enjoyed the discussion. Brother Jason will be with y'all next week, so I know that will be good and edifying for everybody. Yes, sir.
You were talking about the bamboo. I asked a fellow one time, the elderly gentleman, about growing grass. What could I do? And he said, move.